Right. Well, welcome everybody to our meeting about social progress index, a new tool for measuring equity and opportunity in Philadelphia. Um, I am Jeff Hornstein, the Executive Director of the Economy League of Greater Philadelphia. For those of you who don't know, we're a 111-year-old think and do tank, the region's sort of independent, nonpartisan organization supported by we have 65 corporate and organizational board members, and we run a variety of programs, but the most relevant one to this conversation is our Policy Hub initiative, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But we are strong believers that one of our missions is to provide actionable intelligence to policymakers and decision makers in the region to help them make good data-informed decisions. And we are trying to break down silos among data producers. Yes, we will make the PowerPoint presentation available. I see that in the chat. And great, please use the chat function to ask questions, but we will have plenty of time for live Q&A after our presentation, and we'll take some breaks in between as well. I wanted to introduce my partner in crime here, Cassie Haynes from Resolve Philly, to say a couple words, and then we'll get the ball rolling. Cassie.
Hi, good morning. I'm Cassie Haynes. I'm the co-executive director of Resolve Philly, and we are a journalism nonprofit. We're dedicated to developing and advancing journalism that's built on collaboration, equity, and the elevation of community voices and solutions. And if the Economy League is really dedicated to providing actionable intelligence for policymakers, Resolve is dedicated to providing actionable intelligence to members of our community through news and information.
That's great, thank you. So I'd like to next introduce Kira Kaczynski from Deloitte here in the Philly office. She's the Inclusive Growth Lead for Global Public Policy, and she'll tell you why she happens to be on this call.
Thanks, Jeff, and thank you everyone for having all of us here. It's very exciting for me. I'm delighted to be here for two of my roles, not just as the Inclusive Growth Lead for Global Public Policy at Deloitte, but also as a Philadelphia resident and Democratic committee person in the 30th Ward. First, I'll talk a little bit about Deloitte. Why we're a sponsor and partner of the Social Progress Index and Social Progress Imperative. We at Deloitte believe that contributing to social progress is central to the role of business in society, and it's also critical to its future success. Social progress is the foundation of competitiveness and stability. Economies cannot thrive without healthy and well-educated citizens, adequate infrastructure, effective rule of law, and tolerance. Deloitte has long had an active voice on this agenda, and we believe that business should actively collaborate to drive policies and initiatives that seek to address and improve the well-being of society. In 2013, we became a founding partner of the Social Progress Imperative. We saw the potential in the Social Progress Index as a tool that could help as a roadmap to guide policymakers and business leaders in decisions on investments, resources, and collaborations. SPI provides a common language and can help in transparency around policies, programs, and investments. Today, we continue to sponsor SPI. I manage our partnership, working closely with Justin, who you'll hear from later today, and the rest of the SPI team. Our global chair, Sharon Thorne, sits on the board of the Social Progress Imperative. But we're not alone in this. Thinking around business and society, other SPI board members include senior executives from Standard Chartered and UBS. More broadly, I think there are increasingly numbers of CEOs and chairmen of major companies who understand that doing business better not only produces better returns, but also adds value to society. And today's business leaders believe and want to better understand the forces shaping our world and how to make responsible decisions on where and when and how to respond. Business and society are inextricably linked. As our global CEO likes to say, business cannot succeed if society fails. And so this is the main reason for our partnership and sponsorship of SPI. Personally, as I've been working with SPI, I've seen how it's expanded and does an increasingly amount with local indexes in cities and subnational indexes around the world. As a newer resident of Philadelphia, and my second really more passionate reason for being here today, I believe, and I'm committed to the city, I believe that this can help Philadelphia and all citizens and improve our lives for everyone, not just by looking at things through the lens of the economy and the poverty issues we have in Philadelphia, but to truly understand what's happening on the ground in Philadelphia. SPI can bring an important lens to the city and allows us to talk about these real issues for citizens and how we can solve them. I've had conversations with people across the city and City Hall, members of some of your teams, and I think we're all starting to see the real value of putting this social progress lens on our actions in Philadelphia and the value that can bring to the city. So I'm really thrilled to be here today and see the interest from Resolve in the Economy League, which I'm really excited about. But also as your constituent, I really urge you to take a look at this really important tool for transparency and decision-making to improve our great city of Philadelphia. So thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Kira. And I should also mention that Deloitte is a board company at the Economy League. So I just want to do a very, very quick round of intros. So I'm going to call on you because I can see your videos, and unmute yourself and just tell us your name and what your role is and what council office or other part of the world you work in. So Dave Maynard, why don't you start?
Hi everybody, I'm Dave Maynard. I'm policy advisor to council member at large Isaiah Thomas.
Rachel Meadows.
Hi everyone, my name's Rachel and I do legislation and policy for Councilwoman Sherelle Parker.
Wilson Good.
Good morning, I'm Wilson Good. I'm Senior Policy Advisor to the City Council President.
Derek Green.
Councilmember at large, Derek Green.
Jean Friedman-Radowski.
Hi, I'm Jean Friedman-Radowski of Resolve Philly. I am Cassie Haynes's co-pilot.
Jamie Gaudier.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Councilmember Jamie Gaudier. I represent the 3rd District.
I see Alan's iPad. I assume that's Alan Dom.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Councilman Alan Dom. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Thrilled to have you. Pierre Jean. Okay. Chris Goy.
Hi, everyone. Chris Goy, Director of Policy for Council President Darrell Clark.
Allison Storr.
Hi, everyone. Allison Storr, Director of Policy and Legislation for Councilmember Kendra Brooks.
Sherelle Parker.
Good morning, Sherelle Parker, Councilwoman for the 9th District.
Delighted to see you, as always. Erin Stanimore.
Hi, Erin, from Councilmember Alan Dom's office. Thanks for having us.
Hi, Erin, and thank you so much for your work in building this connection with SPI. Mahona Sadiq.
Morning, everyone. Mahona Sadiq, Project Manager at the Economy League.
I just lost my view here. Someone is playing with the screen. Sorry, I'll get back.
Jeff, that's Ian on the phone number.
Eric Bodson.
Good morning, Eric here with Councilman Sanchez's office.
And Kelly.
Yep, here from Chief of Staff to Councilman Squilla.
All right, I think that's everybody. Did I miss anybody? Just trying to scroll through.
Hi, folks.
I didn't, oh, sorry, Nick. And I did not introduce Mike because I'm going to introduce Mike in a second. And Justin, want to say a quick hi?
Hi, everyone. Justin Edwards from Social Progress Imperative.
Great. So this is an awesome gathering of folks. Thank you to members of City Council in particular for taking the time out of your very busy lives to be here. So next up, unless there are any other framing remarks, we are going to go into presentation. We've got 3 presenters. We're going to keep this brief so there's plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Mike Shields from my staff, who's leads our Policy Hub initiative and is a self-defined data nerd, is going to kick it off, followed by Julie Christie, who's the data analyst for Resolve Philly, and then Justin from Social Progress Imperative is going to really walk us through the tool itself. So take it away, Mike.
Thanks, Jeff. Can everyone hear me okay? Good. Jeff, you still are unmuted. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Waiting for someone. All right. Before we begin, I just want to go over a few, housekeeping rules. I'm sure all of us have gotten used to this virtual etiquette, but just please make sure to mute your microphone for your laptop or your cell phone. So right now, if you just 1 second, just make sure that you have a little microphone with a red microphone with a dash through it to make sure that you're muted. We will have plenty of time at the end for questions and answers, but if you really do have a burning question during a certain slide or some point that is made, feel free to use the chat function. You can put your questions in there and we'll refer back to it during the Q&A session. And then as always, we just ask that you please be respectful of the presenters and of your fellow attendees. So our agenda for today. So this is a discussion about data. As Jeff said, I'm a self-prescribed data nerd, so I'm very excited about the discussion today. So we're really going to focus on that there's more out there to what we're usually measuring, and that how we're going to integrate some new techniques and new opportunities into Philadelphia's data infrastructure through what is the Social Progress Index, which we'll get into, and then followed by a question and answer session. So I want to start off with, we're all on the same page. Whether you're working for City Council, part of the Economy League, Resolve Philly, we're just 3 organizations all sort of working towards alleviating poverty and promoting equitable prosperity in Philadelphia. And that is a good thing. And one of the things that I've noticed from organizations, not just us, but all the other ones, is that we have common sort of statistics and common languages that we constantly use both in our programming and in our reports. We know that Philadelphia is the largest poorest city in America. We know that roughly 25% of the city's population is living below poverty, that just under 3/4 of the population, of the working age population, is participating in the labor force. But that really only gives a small picture of what a multi-dimensional phenomenon like poverty really is. To really reiterate this point, if we think about the metrics that we use and how we've sort of described these things, one of the things to focus on is the poverty threshold, for example. That is based off of a sort of straight of the line. The federal government kind of determines what the measurement is. As of 2020, any family of 4 making less than $26,200 is considered living in poverty. So what that means is if you're making $26,300, congratulations, you may be living that same experience of being impoverished, but you don't sort of qualify for some of the programming that those who would be making less than you are. So what I want to sort of reiterate here is that we need more social metrics to compare and to contrast along with our economic metrics to get at a better picture of what is that lived experience of an impoverished resident of Philadelphia. And here are some of those metrics that are being underutilized that I think there's an opportunity to include more. Some of us know of where these data are in the city of Philadelphia or who may have access to it. But the real question I want you to ask is how often are we turning to this data when we're describing a phenomenon of poverty? How often are we using this stuff in our programming or to target interventions? So housing and homelessness, access to nutrition and basic medical care, personal safety, access to the internet or transportation access. These are all data that exist in Philadelphia's data infrastructure, but aren't necessarily being utilized to the extent that we think they could be. And I'm going to flip it over to Julie to kind of take over to the next point.
really just started talking without unmuting myself. Sorry about that, everybody. I'm Julie Christie. I'm the Data and Impact Editor at Resolve Philly. And I spend a lot of my time working with the city's data. And it's very, very clear that Philly has so much data and information out there. It's incredibly rich with anything you could honestly think of. You know, like we have a data set that talks about how wide all the sidewalks are, and that's incredible. But the way that, you know, we access data, and whether it's been you who's experienced this or somebody on your team who does work with data, we all know that it's really scattered across a bunch of different stuff. We have a fantastic data warehouse in Open Data Philly. And then there's other data sets that are coming in from programs that are not as recent or commonly used anymore. And it's one of those things where we know where to get the data, but using it and putting it together in a way that is actionable and truly informative, and you know, is pretty much, it's intersectional and it looks at all the different things going on. That's much harder to do because of how our infrastructure has been kind of put out there and then also partially not put out there, because not everything is, you know, accessible through Open Data Philly. Census data, for example, you have to go through a whole nother system in order to be able to get to that. Mike, if you could go to the next slide. Thanks. So the main thesis that we are proposing here is that we need a new tool for measuring all of these things we're talking about when it comes to poverty, safety, and the issues that are really pressing for our society and in Philadelphia specifically. So, you know, being able to measure social progress and all of these things in Philadelphia, this new tool that we're proposing to you today is what will make it so that anybody can access this information and get something truly valuable and usable from it without having to come up against a lot of the barriers that I think people do come up against when they're exploring this. Go ahead.
Thanks, Julie. And I want to point out too that we have been working, you know, both at Resolve and the Economy League with narrowing that data gap, building that bridge from those economic measures to those social measures. As part of the Policy Hub initiative, I was in the process of building out a web-based publicly accessible data repository that sort of gathers and collects all publicly available data from the city, the Fed, the state, and a few regional, you know, SEPTA as well, to try to put it all in one place and aggregate it across geography. One of the biggest issues that we see in Philadelphia's data infrastructure is that different departments and offices are collecting data at different levels. So I was able to create a shell that allows you to, hey, census data is collected at the census tract. What does this look like aggregated to the city council district? Or, hey, this information at the police district would be great if it was informed from data all the way at the zip code level that's being collected by another office. Here's how they can connect and talk to each other. I've also been on a talking tour around different offices and departments within the city and from private data providers as well, really sort of looking under the rug to see what are the data norms and needs in Philadelphia. You know, where is the data being hidden, or where is it not being utilized to the extent that it could, or where's an organization collecting data but really not knowing how to use it? And you know, you find some very fascinating and interesting stories that, you know, we could spend a whole nother webinar discussing. But what it really comes down to is that there is this great opportunity right now to utilize Philadelphia's data to build a tool that better measures social progress, equity, and opportunity to the extent that we would not be able to achieve, you know, on our own. So I want to sort of introduce Justin Edwards from the Social Progress Imperative to kick off and talk about the Social Progress Index.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you, Julie. I think this is really, really exciting. I've been really fortunate to have been speaking with both of you now for the past couple of months as we've been sort of forming this idea. And I'm really inspired, obviously, both by Mike, you know, your approach and the Economy League's approach to addressing data and not just talking about the technocratic elements of it, but the fact that there's a whole lot of insight that we're not actually utilizing to its fullest potential. And obviously the work that Julie and Cassie and everybody at Resolve is doing is really ground truthing this and pulling those narratives out of the community and really standing that up against data, which I think is a often missed point. when we talk about the world of data today. One, in making sure that we're verifying, what the data is telling us and what the perceptions of what the lived experiences are, but also how that backflow and that feedback loop can actually inform what we're not measuring and how we're not approaching and defining things like success and progress and inclusion and equity. We don't want to continue to develop a long list of new terminology. We really want this to be rooted in true human lived experience. And I think we're at a stage in society now when we recognize where we've made missteps and mismanaged and mismeasured, and now have an opportunity to change the direction of our communities and societies. The SPI, the Social Progress Index, it was developed in response really to the 2008 global financial crisis. We had a number of leaders who now currently sit on our board, including leaders from leading U.S. philanthropy, like the former president of the Rockefeller Foundation, Judy Rodin, the former U.S. editor-in-chief of The Economist magazine, Matthew Bishop. We had folks from Latin America and Africa got together around this World Economic Forum roundtable and posed the question really to the community there, saying, we have business intelligence tools like the Global Competitiveness Index that have helped nations develop strategies and economic policies to help build robust financially driven and measured economies to lift millions of people out of poverty. And yet we've taken our eye off the ball on what the sort of human costs were by chasing and perpetuating this progress through the lens of economic gain purely. We saw that things like happened in, from a national perspective in Tunisia. One of the real sort of drivers of the uprising there that led to great economic fallout was a social uprising from the agriculture sector. And at the time, if you remember the economic history here, Tunisia was a poster child for GDP growth in the region, in the MENA region. And it really took a lot of people by surprise. So what we did was, pulled together a team of folks who really thought about how do we build this level of business intelligence, but root it squarely in the social impact space. We brought on a couple of key advisors by the way of Professor Scott Stern from MIT, Sloan School of Management, and then, as my British boss says, a red in tooth and claw Republican, registered Republican, Michael Porter from Harvard Business School, godfather of competitiveness, who came sort of in the later stages now of his career to recognize that he kind of got it wrong, and that social progress and solid social foundations contribute greatly to the the longevity and the sustainability of a competitive economic society. How do you take the concept of social progress and then develop a measurement framework? We consulted a number of literature, leading economists like Amartya Sen, Joe Stiglitz, Jean-Paul Fitoussi, who were part of a Sarkozy Commission on Social Progress, and thinking already in the early 90s on how to redevelop metrics for the 21st century economy that we were entering. Our definition of social progress is in front of you here, and then we'll turn to the index here in a moment, where you can see where we basically disaggregate this definition into a robust framework in which we then can populate with metrics. Really, the goal is we envision a society in which all people have the conditions necessary to achieve a healthy, sustainable quality of life, and one that allows them to pursue their own vision and dreams. Can you go to the next slide, Mike? This is the basic structure of the index itself, and it asks universally important questions. Universally meaning they're important to all people in all societies, whatever gender, race, level of development, rich or poor. Do people have basically basic medical care? Can they keep themselves clean? And do they have access to fresh water? Do they live in a safe environment? And do they have a place to live? The second dimension, foundations of well-being, really asks, are the building blocks in place on which to build a better life? Basic education, access to information and communications. Can I keep myself healthy without, acquiring diseases, transmittable diseases? Do I live in an environment that is already so toxic that it stacks the odds against me? And then what really sets this index apart from others is third dimension, is it measures the non-economic aspects of opportunity. Are people's rights being protected? Do they have actual freedoms in their life and the ability to make life altering choices? Is this an inclusive society in which people of a certain disability status or race or sexual orientation or gender? Are they being excluded from participating in society and contributing as a member of society? And do people have access and the ability to pursue sort of enlightened education? Just a really brief sort of methodological rundown. These three dimensions are sort of, they're weighted equally, as well as the 4 subcomponents inside each of them. Inside each of those subcomponents, we measure anywhere between 3 and 6 indicators that collectively, both from a context standpoint, as well as a statistical sort of resonance, demonstrate relationships and values. So we're looking at the interrelated issues through the lens of data that can help define a concept that you can find in the index here. And then it rolls up and it aggregates to a single number. We know that single numbers are powerful. GDP is driven by a single number. We know that we say GDP fell by 2% and people start, freaking out. Well, if we want to be able to track and say social progress is tracking to decline by 1% in this community, what are the policies, what are the investments, what are the reactions we can make collectively across sectors to make sure that we plan for that to not happen? We can also set targets in this way and say, yes, we want to grow our economy by 2 points, but we also want to achieve a higher level of social progress. How do we sort of use the two in combination to do so? Can we go to the next slide, Mike? Basic design principles. We measure only social and environmental indicators. We do not measure economics. In so doing, we're measuring social progress and its elements directly and holistically. We're also able then to take a measure of social progress and stand it up on an axis against things like GDP, median household income, poverty rate, or others, and really understand and interrogate the relationships between them and identify when economic gain is actually contributing more rapidly to social progress and its elements, and when economic development starts to provide less and less influence on the quality, the health of our societies. We focus on outcomes and not inputs. We want to measure the true lived experience. The perfect classic example is, the US spends the most on healthcare, receives the least. We don't want to measure the capacity of a society to make change. We want to measure how many people are getting sick, how many third graders are hitting their literacy attainment rates, how many people are suffering under an inequitable sort of pay scenario in their communities. We want to make this relevant to all people. This is the universality principle. Our societies in the US are inherently multicultural. They are very diverse in many places, they're not. But we have a sort of a promise to deliver to people in the US and broadly speaking around the world, to deliver equally to people of disabled people, people of different backgrounds, orientations, age, race. And so we cannot make this only for one set of people and not for others. We need to make it just as important for wealthy people as it is important for poor people. And we designed this index to be actionable in that we want to be able to see progress over time. We want to be able to benchmark and track that movement backwards and forwards on these issues and understand what were the contributing elements to that either success or that failure. That's for planning, that's for benchmarking, and that's also for cultivating new partnerships to drive solutions. We can go to the next slide here. Just really quickly, I joined in 2014. Kira mentioned that we've been around since 2013. We started as a global index measuring nations quickly. In 2014, we started working at the subnational level. The first subnational application of this index was developed in the Brazilian Amazon. So it is possible to do it in more developed areas as well. We measured using local data from 9 states in the Brazilian Amazon. We measured 776 municipalities across the 9 states in the Amazon. It developed a very rich catalog of data that provided a completely different picture of development in the region that also was adopted by several state governors and was used to influence the federal dialogue with federal government in the country of Brazil. Since 2014, our global network of partners has expanded. Now we're in over 45 countries. I lead all of our work in the United States and Canada. Recently, we just finished developing an index for the entire province of Alberta with a Crown Corp. It's a sort of Canadian government-owned, Alberta province-owned bank that drives both business and social solutions across the province. Since 2014, I've been working really closely in communities across the U.S. Started really in Detroit and Oakland and the Boston metro area, and since then have brought partnerships online from Jackson, Mississippi to the Silicon Valley area, the Bay Area, and San Jose, working in San Mateo County, now working in Miami-Dade County and elsewhere. We're very business friendly. We work with businesses. We work with governments. We work with cross-sector collaboratives who really rally in the same sense that Jeff and group here have kind of posited for us to consider. If you go forward, Mike, again. I just wanted to provide a few examples of a really exciting partnership that we launched last October after about a year of working with Mayor Liccardo's team in the city of San Jose. In his June 2019 budget address to City Council, Liccardo really was talking about changing the system, about how city government approaches the budgeting process and approaches program and service development. He was already a little bit ahead of the curve. I'd say we're all 10 years behind the curve talking, or greater, talking about things like equity and how to embed equity into decision-making from the top level in finance and government and all the way down to the bottom level on the ground in terms of how we deliver services to our communities. But he did propose that we change the way city staff actually advocated and then allocated city resources. This budget was approved, and the budget sort of making and decision on investing process was approved by City Council. The 2019-2020 budget was $4.3 billion. I think they're just finalizing right now the 2020-2021 budget, and I'm hoping to get the report back on that. As part of that, we developed a customized social progress index for the city, measuring social progress down to the 216 census tracts inside the city and providing a roll-up to zip codes, which was also resonant to how they allocated resources. They were also working in partnership with the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, which is a framework and a mechanism of training to train people on how to use equity in the everyday sort of decision-making process for municipal and regional governments. You go forward. This is a partnership with, really driven by the City of San Jose and the Mayor's Office. We had some local folks there, the Skoll Foundation, who, like Deloitte, are a founding member of our organization. They really believe in the power of social entrepreneurship, which is, using a business solution to solve a social need. And then the Silicon Valley Community Foundation and Microsoft, they're a partner with the city itself. This is the framework that we developed with the City of San Jose. You can see the same basic structure here. We integrated about anywhere between 3 and 5 indicators within each component, and this was blending obviously some federal data from the census. We used a lot of Santa Clara County agency data, which was the source data in reference already in the mayor's office for reporting success. So we wanted to tie this as quickly and tightly as possible to the budget and performance process that was already in place. And then we also used a number of indicators from city departments, including like 311 data, including police data as well. If you go to the next slide here, going back to my point, because we strip economics out, we're actually able to measure the relationship between the social progress and levels of income across the city. And what we quickly find is this is very consistent, both from a global perspective, where we've done this regionally, nationally, and down in cities, is that you can identify areas of similar economic capacity, widely divergent on social progress. We can then further investigate what are the particular differences within those communities that's driving and contributing. In some communities, it may be a safety issue. In other communities, it may be a health issue. In other communities, it may be an inclusion factor, or there may be a cultural element that is really driving the performance of those communities down. And so having an approach of, a wide cast net of solutions to solve all problems will not work. We know that we need to customize our interventions based on the actual evidence of the particular area of need. We can also use this to identify who are the best players. Where do the best assets and solutions exist? And is it a private sector play? Is it a government play? Is it a nonprofit play? Or are there opportunities for partnerships to form and address this with the most readily available assets? Likewise, you can look horizontally across here and identify that a zip code, the one on the far left, that is achieving a certain level of social progress with half the amount of money of other communities. Why is that? Do we need that much wealth to achieve a certain level of social progress? There's evidence that suggests no, but there's also evidence and opportunities to dig down even deeper, which is the next step that we go to. Mike, if you can go forward. This is a tool that we call it our scorecard. It's a relative performance assessment. In many examples where we work, we'll go ahead and look at all of the units of observation that we measure. In this case, 216 census tracts, or I think there were, or 213 census tracts, pardon me. I think there are about 50 zip codes in the city. We ring fenced and we say, okay, this community, let's say, we'll just start by median household income. What are the 10 other census tracts most similar in median household income? And let's look at how this particular community is performing relative to those others. We can build cohorts on a whole host of different other criteria. We can look at the demographic breakdowns. We can look at this by neighborhoods. We can look at it by zip codes. We can look at it by a bunch of different elements. But what we're seeing here is, in yellow, it's basically you're performing on average. If there's a yellow arrow pointing down, it means you're trending downwards. If you're performing red in a solid circle, it means that you're significantly underperforming the average or the median performance across that cohort group. If it's a triangle, it means that you're tracking to be underperforming. Likewise, if it's green, you're overperforming your cohort on that particular issue. And if it's a green triangle, then it means that you're trending towards overperformance. How is this important? One, we can look outside of our natural boundaries in neighborhoods in which we kind of typically associate ourselves with and identify solutions from all the way across a city or all the way across a geography from a community that we would never consider ourselves having anything similar with or anything to learn from. Likewise, we also challenge some of the prevailing sort of perceptions about whether or not we live in a safe neighborhood or an unhealthy or healthy neighborhood. We can really sort of ground truth and really sort of interrogate our own understanding of our communities through the evidence of the data that we're showing here. We're also able then to really pinpoint and go into the community and track what are the actual most pressing needs of this community, verify this with the communities where I get excited thinking about working with somebody like Resolve, and then how do you then identify the best players to drive a solution inside of here. So how has this been used in San Jose? Can you go forward one more slide, Mike? One of the really big interesting findings for me, anybody who's familiar with that city, Willow Glen, it was a working class neighborhood at one point, probably 25, 30 years ago. Now it's a little bit more white collar, very wealthy wealthy part of the city, but also edges up against this Guadalupe Parkway, which is a very physical dividing border in many ways between East and West San Jose. We found, two neighborhoods half a mile apart from each other. One was the highest ranking census tract in the city. The other one ranked 167th. Why is that? That's a really interesting finding. There was some work done, some local journalism going in there. But this kind of kickstarts your thinking about why is social progress not translating, 2 blocks away? Why is it only isolated in a block by block fashion? I mean, I know a little bit about Philadelphia. I've lived in the DC area and worked in DC now for almost 14 years. I know what it's like to say block to block. And I think that that's a very unfair world that we live in right now when we have evidence of success just across the street from us. If you go forward one more slide, Mike. How is the city using it? Here are just a few examples. In 2019, they resourced over 40 traffic calming projects. They spent a lot of money already and didn't necessarily know where to put them and where they might actually have the most impact. They also trained a number of community leaders. These are people in the public schools. These are people in businesses on how to identify opportunities to call out safety training needs across the city. Using the mapping tool that we've developed for them, they're now prioritizing by neighborhood where they can identify, where they can have the greatest impact by deploying those resources they've already spent. Another really big issue coincided with something that the city was doing at the time by developing something called the Digital Inclusion Fund. It was a local philanthropic and corporate financed fund to help close the digital divide. Over 100,000 people in the city of San Jose. Is just a little over 1 million people that lack access to high-speed quality broadband. This is an economy that is, advanced manufacturing. Government services are digitally delivered. It's the heart of Silicon Valley, and it was an unacceptable inequity for the mayor. And he starts thinking, how can we really attack this? We're able to identify those neighborhoods, prioritize where we could deploy solutions, and maybe dip into that fund. But they also recognized that they had existing municipal assets. Without spending another dollar, they were able to say, we have 4,000 city-owned light poles. How can we invite private sector investment to come in and partner with us? One, to install this small cell broadband and really then achieve this social impact target. There are a whole host of others. I left off a lot of their other slides. I was in San Jose in February this year, right before all flights were grounded to a halt. And we did a half-day training and workshop in which my partners from city government came in and really kind of worked with the community. I think the next slide shows some of that work with a group called SPUR. It's a public policy action group, nonprofit that does urban policy recommendations, very similar in some ways to the Economy League. But we brought together people from San Jose State, Stanford University, local nonprofits, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, members of city government departments, some of my colleagues, and then the gentleman in the blue plaid jacket here was my lead partner, Con Russo, is the policy advisor to Mayor Liccardo at the time. He's now since gone on to the San Francisco Foundation. But you can kind of see the impact that this had, from a residential perspective, from philanthropy. There's value coming obviously from data scientists and academics. Nonprofit leadership was there as well, and talking, which I think is very powerful it's about rationalizing the value instead of just trying to talk this soft language that oftentimes nonprofits get trapped in and misses the mark when they're trying to talk with government or private sector. And I really like to include this quote from Mayor Liccardo, because I think that there is a sort of bi-directional opportunity here to use data as evidence and then ground truth this with community voice, which is a very exciting prospect here. As I mentioned, I'm working with a number of other cities across the country. I spent about 1.5 years working with Jackson, Mississippi, with the mayor's office there, Mayor Lumumba, if you're familiar with him. This is a poor community. They were a data poor community as well. We really helped them digitize a lot of their data. Now, they've got a very innovative administration there, working on very, very important and innovative direction and changing the system on how economics and social development are going to continue in that capital city, which I think we all are quite familiar with its history. I'm also working with regional government in San Mateo County, Miami-Dade County, talking with Lincoln, Nebraska. We've worked with folks in the Bay Area now for over 5 years. I'm really, a partner to a lot of those folks in those cities. We're not a consultancy, we're a nonprofit. We like to say that we're in service to changing the system, changing how we measure things, and changing how we actually spark interventions in our communities and try to build towards a better society. And thanks, Jeff, Nick, Mike, obviously, for the conversations and bringing us on board, and Kira, of course, for really stewarding this thing from the beginning. The opportunity here. Jeff, do you want to take over here? Nope. Okay. The opportunity I think that we're talking about really is how do we bring this framework to Philadelphia? Obviously, leveraging the data that exists and the partners that we've got assembled here now. to develop a hyper-local index, really bake it down to the census tract, which allows us then to roll up to council units. We can roll up to zip codes. We can develop scorecards for each of those resolutions. How do we backbone the infrastructure through providing an open data platform, data visualization platform, to allow not just city government officials, but business, the community, to really interact with that data in compelling ways, to tell compelling stories, and to really identify opportunities to make more strategic decisions, from the budgeting process, the investment process, the program delivery, and also in how we just understand our communities and engage with each other as residents of a unified place. This will really in turn expand on the evaluation and the analytical capacity of, I think, all sectors to better understand the direction that Philadelphia is going in and where it is now. And it really brings in a lot of capacity development and training for local stakeholders. We do a lot of training in every place where we go. We really want people to understand how the index is developed, how it can be improved over time, how we can challenge the way that we're measuring these concepts, and really then advocate for better data in many ways. We know that the data atmosphere that exists today, July 2020, does not measure effectively all the concepts that influence our lives. How do we actually incentivize new forms of information collection that can better define and measure elements of our lives, and then bake that into this analytical capacity? And then how does this link up with the other work that we're doing in the US? I'm really also, a second hat that I wear is I try to foster a lot of collaboration across my partners and bring in experience from San Jose and connect it with my partners in Jackson, with our partners in Miami. I know several of you have already attended a couple of our webinars that we've been doing that are taking place of our annual conference, but this is something that is ongoing. Right now in San Mateo County, for example, we're about 2/3 of the process complete in developing an index, but also working with the budget and performance management office and a number of county supervisors there on training them how to go into the community and how to talk with others on how to use this index as well. And now we're baking a lot of relationships in with our partners in Miami-Dade County who are starting this from a very similar perspective. So that's the sort of proposition, I think, that that we're all talking about now for Philadelphia, and I'm excited to be a part of this. Been happy to have the conversations, and I'm really hoping we can collaborate on something. Take a look at the question just came in.
Thanks, Justin. I'm going to move it over to Cassie now to kind of talk about how we foresee the players to bring this opportunity to Philadelphia.
I'm going to be really brief because I also want to make sure that there's ample time to answer questions. And y'all can see on the screen right now what the Economy League, what SPI, and Resolve Philly are all excited to work together around and to bring to the table. But I do want to take a second to just call out. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the U.S. Partnership on Mobility from Poverty, which was a think tank of experts brought together, funded by the Gates Foundation over 2 years to really look at social mobility, economic inclusion, and they came up with these 5 necessary components of a strategy to address economic mobility and social inclusion. And two of those components are transforming how we engage with data and changing the narrative. And I think this particular combination of partners really serves those 2 interlocking components of a strategy for our community around addressing this broader issue of social mobility. I think we are uniquely situated to really both bring this tool to Philly and also get it out there, make sure it's used, make sure it's accessed. The ability of Resolve's newsroom partners to do that, the ability of our community engagement team to work with the community and how individuals and community organizations access this data. And then, combined with the Economy League's power, their local network of data producing organizations, right, of policymakers, their influence, and the deep work that they've already been doing in building a large data repository. And then, the industry expertise and what we've seen this tool accomplish in other communities. That's a real magical trifecta, in our opinion.
Great, thanks, Cassie. We think you guys are magical as well. It is a very magical trifecta. So just to get very brass tacks here, we are a think and do tank over here at the Economy League. So we want to bring this from the abstract to the concrete. And thanks, Justin, for that incredibly informative and clear presentation. We're starting to get a bunch of good questions in the chat. It is storming where I am right now, so if I drop, my colleagues Nick and Mike will take over, but hopefully that won't happen. So what we are hoping to do is partner with city government to get this tool up and running. And there are, the timeline here is, this is the build period. The first year it'll take us a year to get this thing up and running. So from the moment we get funding, we'll be looking to put planning, data assessment, training, capacity building, then developing the tool itself, finalizing the index, integration of additional Philadelphia-based metrics, and then working with Resolve in particular to sort of validate community stakeholders and make sure this thing makes sense to end users. And you can see on this chart, there's there are different roles for the different organizations here. SPI has roles, Resolve and the Economy League have roles, and then there are collaborative pieces where we'll all be working together. So that's the build period. Next slide, please. And so for the first year of development, we estimate that this project is going to cost about $190,000. We are looking for about $150,000. The Skoll Foundation will match funds, so we are looking for some commitment from city government. We will do some fundraising on our own. Resolve has, we'll do some as well. But this is it's actually a pretty cheap build for the first year of development. In the grand scheme of things, we know the city budget's incredibly tight thanks to the pandemic, but we think this is an amazing investment to be made with a high social rate of return, because we can't plan for an equitable recovery unless we have data and tools to benchmark progress. And then next slide. And then of course there's a maintenance. So what we're really proposing here is a 3-year pilot. First year to build, and then it'll cost about $100,000 a year for the Economy League and Resolve, we believe, to maintain, further integrate, and develop, broaden data, continue the upkeep and utilization, make sure community continues to get more and more community. I mean, obviously, Resolve has very deep community roots. They will amplify, so we'll shape and inform policy programming and maintain and engage and educate folks. So that is our ask to those of you on City Council to think about if there's a way to put some city money on the table for this. We believe very strongly that this is better housed in an autonomous nonprofit like the Economy League than inside city government for a number of reasons, including changing priorities of different administrations, et cetera. Obviously, that's a discussion we should be having, but we feel like the Economy League was kind of built for this purpose, and we couldn't imagine a better sort of ground partner than Resolve to work with us on this. So I will stop here and flip to the last slide, and we will open the floor for questions. I've already gotten a few from the chat, so please post questions to the chat. I will start with, and you can all unmute yourselves as we're called. Start with Dave Maynard, who from Councilmember Thomas's office, who asked, could you address, and this, I assume this is addressed to Justin, could you address how you allow for flexible adaptation while also aggregating to a single comparable number?
So the methodology of the index allows, it's really focused both at those three-dimensional levels and then the four subcomponents inside each. And that methodology never changes. We designed this so that it would be flexible, where we can then measure the concept of, let's say, shelter, or in the US, oftentimes I change that a little bit to just talk about housing. In a global perspective, shelter, when we're measuring Mali and Vietnam and France and Uzbekistan, shelter takes on a completely different, contextual sort of multi-dimensionality, right? When we're talking about a major urban area, we're talking about very specific issues around shelter. And that's really obviously around like availability of housing, quality of housing, cost burden of housing, both for renters and owners, and whether or not perhaps that city is like meeting if there are mandated sort of like regional housing needs or allocation numbers and things like that. The index was really designed to be flexible to do that. We look both from what we like to do is when we build this index, we collectively build this with others who are experts on this or are very, close to the ground with these issues. And so we want to bounce the context. Is this passing a gut check, with the folks who are going to be talking about housing in this way? But we also want to look at statistical relevance and how those things interact with each other. I could go into like using principal component analysis and things like that, and looking at like Cronbach's alpha scores. Mike might smile right now, but it might also put others to sleep. But there is a complete, transparent, and open source methodology that we can share on that point. I hope that answers it. If not, please let me know.
Wilson, why don't you ask your question next? I meant to have Dave just ask it rather than reading it for him. Wilson, you still on?
The simple question is this supposed to be a tool for policy analysis and design, or are you defining the lack of social progress as the problem itself?
I mean, I would say that overall, what we're trying to do is take a much different systemic approach to talking about what defines progress or what defines value in our world anymore. And we don't think that should only be measured in an economic perspective. We've built this SPI to be very complementary to the economics. So
I get that point. So could you just define what you think the actual problem is?
Well, we can say that the actual problem is when you look at sort of poverty, for example, going back to what Mike was talking about, you can be economically or financially poor. You can also be house poor. You can be opportunity poor. You can be health poor. And we know that there's different elements actually have sort of reactionary impacts and additional impacts on people. If you have somebody who's very unhealthy, or you have a community that's very, very unhealthy, it's very unlikely they're going to be economically contributing both to the local economy and or the urban, like the overall economy inside the city. We know that if people have, going back to the way I read your question and I tried to break it down was, we can't just provide jobs without providing housing. We can't just provide housing without providing access to services, access to fresh foods, linking that into a realistic way where somebody could take their kid to childcare, see a doctor, send a child to school, and still go to work without putting additional stressors on that person. So in many ways, it is a planning tool. We've seen it being used in an urban planning perspective, but we can also see it being used as a policy informing tool as well. We can identify where, broadly speaking, across the city, we're seeing the widest deviation in performance on these particular issues, and why perhaps we've only got 5 neighborhoods that are achieving super high scores, but the majority of the city is underperforming, and there's a huge gap in between there. And I would say that's a policy directive. And I don't know if anybody would argue with me on that, but I think that is literally where policy intervenes, when we have a scale of diversion like that. And so we're trying to think about the relationships between these things and linking them together in a very common sense, common language format in that way. I hope that answers your question. If not, I'm very happy to.
I'm assuming it is a tool for policy analysis. I guess the final question simply is, how much is it focused on the end user? And can you give me examples in your previous work, how the policy actually came from what's needed by the end user?
Yeah, so a couple slides. I mean, I'll give you a very specific example. City of San Jose, again, they, when they're talking about their equity screening, there was another slide I didn't include in here. They showcased how they used to make decision making on like where, they had resources to invest in and deploy. They call them lactation pods, like public breastfeeding stations for mothers using community services in community centers and libraries. They actually consulted a very limited set of data on the first time that, 2018, 2019, 2017, when they were doing this. Now they're consulting a broader set of data. They're backfilling it with a better understanding. They already have the demographic breakdowns of the communities. They have the economic profiles of the communities. Now they have both the SPI and then all of its, about 50 indicator sort of to look through and make a more nuanced decision on where they could specifically deploy these resources. I could send additional slides on where that, on how that decision was made. The end user itself, I mean, I see this as being available for multiple types of end users. I look at employers, I look at people saying, there's no issue in my community. My community is wealthy. My community has no problems. In fact, we found a lot of places of the highest wealth and those that have sort of the most rigid assumption that there are literally no problems in their community in Silicon Valley are some of those that have actually the highest levels of environmental toxicity and the lowest standards of air quality. It's actually the poorer neighborhoods in some places out there in the Bay Area that actually have some of the higher levels of environmental quality. That's a big issue for people when it's presented to them in that way. And it's also challenging the way some of the infrastructure is responding to the environmental needs of the region out there in the bowl, so to speak. I'd like to just point quickly on some of the conversations that we had with the Workforce Development Office in San Jose. They're a housing challenged area. The Bay Area, it's no surprise, like housing is a massive issue across California. There's not enough room anymore in places like, San Francisco. You can't build anymore on the Bay side. It's all taken up. So more and more people are moving south down the peninsula into San Jose in order to unlock the land to build more housing. And this is a city that committed a long time ago to be single family residential. Everybody loved it. There was a big fight to build up. The big challenge that the mayor is under now is he needs to bring jobs to justify building housing. Well, where to put those jobs? And we did some additional work with them where we built this social progress profile mapping. We also looked at a lot of labor market information and we recreated a methodology that's developed in Oxford University, where you look at a series of occupational data and then this standardized classification of skills mapping across the city. So we identified where there were clusters of certain skills related with particular occupations, which was an opportunity then for the mayor, the housing authority, and the workforce development office to work together in tandem and say, okay, we need housing here. What kind of jobs can we bring here to justify that? We're not just bringing jobs closer to an area that can, capitalize on that, but we're also bringing the capacity to build greater housing to support that economy to continue to flourish. That to me is a systemically different way of doing housing policy and economic development in a city, and not just allowing the richest companies to come in and buy tracts of land that could otherwise be used for housing when it's such, when it's such a critical need. Again, I hope that answered. I'm sorry if I'm being long-winded as well. Apologies.
I just really want to focus on whether the end user is actually policy professionals, analysts and designers, or whether the end user, in some of your other experiences, are actually the individuals from the community who are involved in the process, and you can show actual tangible results, changes to their lives?
Certainly end users from government, like government agency heads, they underwent trainings on how to use this. They're using the index itself just in the budgeting process and in the program, development. So that is one type of end user. We try to open this up so it's available for everybody though. So I would say that there are multiple end users.
Yeah, and I can jump in really quick on that too. I think one of the important roles that Resolve Philly is going to take in this is that it's our intention to make sure that this tool, when it's created, is accessible to a really, really wide range of users, from an individual who is just trying to learn more about their community to a nonprofit, like say, for example, I think at the very least a few years ago, Prevention Point does not have data analysts on their team. They're doing on-the-ground work. So those kinds of organizations, having a tool that is accessible and having access to trainings and curriculum that reduces the workload for them to be able to use data and make those data-based decisions and be able to direct where they are doing their work, better explain to their funders, this is what needs to be happening and why. So it's definitely, the thing that is so attractive for Resolve Philly as well is this massive opportunity for community education and to make it, just something that anybody can get action out of.
Great. Thanks for that clarification, Julie, and thanks for those great questions, Wilson. Dave, you had another question, or unless there's somebody else on the floor who's got one, so we can give opportunity. Anybody else out there? Question for any of us, for me, for Mike, for Julie, for Justin, Cassie, Kira? Hearing none. Dave, why don't you ask your second question then? Dave, you still there? Can people hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Dave, are you gone? All right, well, Dave's second question was, because I think it's a good one, as you've done this work across a fairly wide array of entities, have you picked up on trends and the factors that tend to drive a lack of social progress despite equal wealth?
Yeah, I'd say it's different in different territories and different contexts. I'll just speak from the U.S. perspective here. Nationally, we've been tracking, right, obviously measuring the country now since 2014. We've seen a consistent annual decline in personal safety, in health and wellness, and in personal rights and tolerance and inclusion. These are things that we're feeling these pain points even more loudly, right, and hearing them more loudly today. But this is what we're hearing today is also a reflection of what has been going on in the past as well. And so we have noticed that those particular elements have contributed to the country's annual decline on our global rankings table. And, when I kicked off this work in the US, I wanted to tear apart then the country into the 50 states. First, we looked at how the states played out. And what was really surprising for me was that the state of California, which is kind of why we're so heavily working in California now, they ranked 33rd out of 50 states. And they really stood down on that first dimension of basic human needs. Personal safety, housing, were just, and nutrition and basic medical care. Those are the things that, when we've been measuring this globally, we've been looking at the influence, we track it against GDP growth. That has the tightest relationship with economic gain, that basic human needs dimension. That's where we see the most rapid acceleration in basic human needs as GDP goes up to a certain level. We see that thing skyrocket, and that makes sense. More money means more medicine. More money means more housing. Where it starts to trail off is where you start to have, sort of more financially stable communities. And that was interesting to me to see the state of California falling down so low. So we broke the state of California down into 56 of its 58 counties. And again, we saw that it was housing, personal safety, and nutrition and basic medical care. And what we're finding now in our work in San Jose, we're working in San Mateo County. We're just going to start some work in Orange County as well with some partners there to replicate the approach we're taking in San Mateo County. Is we're looking at the contribution of some of the non-identified people that do have little contributions to other metrics that help define success in one way, but they're not being picked up in the success or failures in other ways. And that's a very interesting thing for us. I would say that the tightest trends that I'm noticing are really around some of those core nutrition, basic medical care, housing and safety, and that basic human needs dimension. Increasingly so, we want to really identify more in more detailed fashion now in this opportunity dimension, particularly around the inclusion component. We're looking at a lot of pay, parity in pay gaps across ethnicities and gender. And we found methodologies now to do that in a much more focused way, sort of digging down deeper into BLS data. Because I think that that's going to be a very important telling factor in what types of economies we're building, and then what kinds of societies are flourishing around inside those economies. And my assumption is that that is a significant driver, not just the amounts of money, but also the inequity and distribution.
Thanks for that, Justin. Other questions from the esteemed group here assembled? Going once, going twice.
Jeff, this is Kira. Can I just address one of Wilson's questions real quick? Just as a side note to also just talk about how else the tool is used. And, in this context and for a lot of cities, it is absolutely a policy tool, an investment making tool. But what I find and what we at Deloitte have found powerful about the Social Progress Index is businesses use it too. There are some amazing, powerful partnerships happening. For example, there's a mining company in Peru, Mincer, that does a social progress index around all of their mines to look at what's happening on the ground and the effect that their business and their mining is having on those communities. And then they work, and that helps to define their corporate responsibility programs, things that they don't think they should do that maybe the government should do, and then they go to the government to talk about those things. So in that sense, I think that it is truly a tool, like community can use it, but we've seen business use it as well. Obviously, and again, as a powerful tool for policy making, budgeting, and all of that kind of thing. But I've been really amazed to see business sometimes come out and use the tool to make better decisions about where a business invests to ensure that they're doing the right thing on the ground for their local communities. So it's just fascinating, the wide breadth of how SPI gets used around the world. To me is just constantly fascinating.
I think that's a great point, Kira. I'm just going to piggyback on that a little bit. I think one of my sort of personal career highlights in working in this happened a couple of years ago in Jackson, Mississippi, when I stood up in front of the first meeting of the Jackson Chamber of Commerce in over 30 years with a sitting mayor of Jackson. So I entered the Chamber of Commerce's sort of esteemed hall with Mayor Lumumba and his a couple department heads from the city, which he unveiled sort of his strategic plan for the city, which is very much aligned with the work that our framework sets forth. It was great. They had a nice moment, and they said, well, we want to work closely. That we haven't been working with the mayor's office for decades. We think that business and government obviously have to partner if we want our city to ever change and stop repeating historic patterns. And then the mayor asked me to stand up and talk about social progress and what is it and why is it important? How does it align with the mayor's vision? I did not anticipate getting a positive reception from this roundtable of 25 CEOs of the largest companies there in Jackson. But in fact, I know one gentleman from the Nissan plant raised his hand and said, you know, Mr. Mayor, I like your strategic plan, but this social thingy is actually very important to me because I have so many executive level jobs going unfilled here. I have so many management jobs going unfilled here because the job description looks right. The salary looks right. People look at the cost of housing here and they fly down here and they see how long it takes you to go to a grocery store. They see how long it takes you to take your kid to a good school. The fact that there's not even a single movie theater inside the city limits of the capital city of Mississippi. That's quality of life stuff, and they're not taking that job. They're opting to go somewhere else. And so that threatens the business sustainability, right, and the profitability of that business. That threatens the tax base. That threatens just the increasing sort of culture of a place to work, live, and thrive in the city. And I think that goes back to Kira's point, is that a lot of people are seeing that this is important when they're making long-term plans on being, you know, economically active in a place. How are they going to contribute to laying the foundations on which they can continue to be active in that sense, which I think is an exciting direction change to talk in that way.
Interesting stuff. Thanks, Kira. Thanks, Justin. Anyone else? We're pushing up on time. We still have a few minutes. So I want to give people the opportunity if they have anything bubbling up here to contribute. Going once, going twice. All right, well, I want to thank everyone for participating this morning. I want to thank our partners, Deloitte and Kira in particular, Resolve, Cassie, Jean, and Julie, our team at the Economy League, Nick and Mike, obviously Justin at SPI, and I especially want to give a shout out to Mike and Julie for putting together this presentation and organizing everybody. The PowerPoint will be PDF'd and circulated. This meeting was recorded. The link will be circulated as well for people if they want to review it. And please, you know, members of City Council and staff, you know, feel free to reach out to me, to Cassie, to Justin, as we hopefully move the ball down the field here. So if there are no further items of business, Mike or Julie, is there anything you need to say before we close out here?
Nope, I think you covered it, Jeff.
Justin?
No,
all right, y'all. Thank you
for
very much. Yeah, thank you all. Have a great day. And let's keep talking. Bye, Cassie.
Thanks.
Wow.
And thank you, Farwa, for organizing this as well.